focus today is on innovation, which I know is a really critical topic for most firms. And so we're going to spend time today with two experts in the area, people who are authors and consultants, and they've impacted the way that a lot of firms approach innovation. As the kind of panel discussion is going to go on, this will be pretty informal. I hope that you'll type comments into the chat box if you have them, and I'll try to keep an eye on that. And then also we'll have some time for open Q&A as time allows towards the end. So let me briefly introduce the topic, and then I'll introduce our panelists. While we all agree that innovation is important, I think there's a bit of a mystery about how do we actually innovate around customer needs, because the idea of a customer need is oftentimes, I think, a pretty vague concept, and oftentimes we end up studying customers and coming up with fairly vague conclusions, like they want the product to be more reliable. Well, that's great to know, but does that mean they want it to last longer? Does that mean they want it to provide more consistent output? Does that mean they want it to be low maintenance? Because that's not clear, we have these really bright engineers who have to basically guess what they think reliability means. They approve the product accordingly, and that may or may not really match what the customer had in mind. And I think a lot of firms, therefore, are a little frustrated at the effort and money they pour into innovation without necessarily always seeing the kind of success. Our two panelists today are going to argue that focusing on a customer's jobs to be done, we're going to use that phraseology of jobs quite a bit here, but they're going to argue that this is a really useful way to understand customer needs in a way that's clear and in a way that really can drive innovation. The roots of the idea really go back to the 60s or probably before then, but you've probably heard the classic, Ted Levitt comment that customers don't want your quarter-inch drill bit, they want a quarter-inch hole, drilled in something. And certainly the ideas of jobs to be done have been refined in recent decades, but the basic truth is that for most products and services, people don't intrinsically want your product or service. They want to hire it because it helps them get something important in their life done. And so to the degree that your innovation efforts focus on understanding what it is they're trying to accomplish, your innovation canvas is dramatically expanded, and you're focusing on things that will really matter rather than just kind of tweaking an existing product. A customer job, so something they're trying to get done, can be a positive thing. A consumer might want to do the job of improve my 10K time. A manager might try to identify the best prospects to pursue. Jobs can also be avoiding something negative or solving some problem. I think during COVID, the job of avoid illness led us to buy a lot of otherwise pretty unattractive products just to get through that time. And solving a problem, a business manager might want to identify customers who are most likely to defect. So that's a job the customer's trying to get done, for which they might hire a solution. So with that as a bit of background to the topic, let me introduce our panelists. First, Dr. Lance Betancourt is one of my colleagues here on the faculty in the Neeley School. Lance brings 12 years of innovation consulting and decades of academic research into innovation. He's the author of Service Innovation. So it's a boring title, but it's a very innovative book. In contrast, our second panelist, Scott Burleson, has a really interesting title for one of his books. So maybe Scott's more innovative. Scott's the senior VP of the AIM Institute, and he came to the jobs to be done perspective, not from an academic inquiry, but as a practicing innovation manager. He's now a leading consultant and author on the topic, but join me in welcoming our two panelists, Lance Betancourt and Scott Burleson. So gentlemen, if I could first of all say welcome, and if I could ask you each to introduce yourself maybe a bit more fully and kind of share how you came to this jobs to be done way of thinking. Lance, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so being my boring self, thank you, Mark. So no, it's very accurate. I wholeheartedly agree. So the way I came to it is interesting, and I think it also ties back to whether the impact that it had on me is probably a little different from, well, very different from Scott. Scott came from a practitioner's perspective, and so it's going to be very good to hear sort of when he came to it and how he saw it as being different from what he was doing and why that shaped him. because mine was different. I was actually teaching an MBA class. I was in that class, we tend to use HBR articles and Sloan's, et cetera. And so I was using an article by one of the foremost thinkers, if not the foremost thinker in the jobs to be done space, which is Tony Ulwick. He had written a 2002 Harvard Business Review article, and it laid out from his consulting company's perspective things that he had been thinking about that tie back to this jobs to be done mentality. And that 2002 article lays out all these truths. It does not specifically refer to jobs to be done, but certainly was the anchor point that then that became part of it. So I was teaching that class, and to me, it was a practical article. It was a useful article for helping my MBAs to get a sense of what how to go about understanding customer needs, and it seemed very pragmatic. And there was this really cool example of some things that Tony and his company had done with Cordis for invention related to angioplasty. And so it was interesting. It was useful. But I say all that because that's how I came about it. But because I wasn't a practitioner, I knew that there was something good there, something useful there, but I wouldn't say that I had this immediate sense of like, oh, wow, this is revolutionary. This is so much better than what's already going on, right? And because the jobs to be done at the end of the day is also itself a solution to help understand customer needs. And I wasn't struggling with the problem. And that's where Scott's insight is going to be so different from mine on this. Then I ended up joining Strategen, the company with Tony, and becoming a consultant full-time consultant for the next 15 years. And I still work a little bit with Strategen, as it turns out, here and there on the side. And so let me just comment then on what did finally shape my perspective, because I think that there are some here who might be somewhat familiar with jobs to be done, and they've seen it, and they've seen Procter & Gamble references, and you just see these little things, you go like, okay, there's something here, but is it really that vastly different from other things I've seen? I hope that Scott and I will give you a sense of how vastly different it is, but experiencing it is the ultimate way to get that sense. And so that was my introduction to it, but then I went and became a practitioner, where I really saw its impact much bigger than I had known before. Was I then had to go out and implement it on behalf of companies in a wide variety of contexts. And I've seen it implemented in everything from software to industrial goods to food-based products to many services, experiential services, vacation-related services, banking services, and so on and so on and so on. I've seen it applied. I've seen its relevance. I've seen its applicability. And I've seen that in these different contexts, the lights come on to managers who have had something, and now they see this better thing, this better way of getting insight. And they're like, this helps us come up with better ideas than we had before. It really takes us beyond reliable, like you were saying, Mark. It really helps us to think creatively about this. And then I also, for me, the other lights coming on was I knew what we were doing, and I thought, this is good. But I then also got to see, as background for a lot of these consulting projects, I saw what they were relying on before hiring us. And I'd see things like, we want our bank to be a comfortable place for customers. And so it's even worse than reliable, right? And I see this, and it was like so much anchored around the current experience and so much in this sort of vague domain. And it's not that there wasn't something there that was valuable to them as a company, but it just wasn't the level of insights that we were able to offer with jobs to be done to really help them to innovate around, as you said, Mark, the reason why someone comes to a bank, right? It's not to have a comfortable experience with the bank. It's to do something. It's to buy a home. And so I need a mortgage for that. It's to manage my day-to-day finances. So I had checking and savings accounts for that, and credit cards and debit cards. And so to me, that was my introduction, but my insight, my revelation came later in seeing it in practice, and then seeing in practice how it was vastly different from what else was out there.
Good. All right. Thanks for sharing that. Scott, what's your story?
You bet. Well, it's interesting. There's a lot of people in product management become practitioners, started out as engineers. And so that was me as well. And when, as an industrial engineer, I found the lean stuff really interesting, and Six Sigma really interesting, and just how you look at a process and how you reduce the errors is a very logical way of thinking. And like, that's kind of cool. And I ran across, there's a guy named Min Ambassador. I took a course from him. It was called Creative Problem Solving. But Min introduced this idea of divergence. This is more in a brainstorming context, but how you come up with a lot of ideas, the things you've all heard, for a season, all ideas are good ideas or whatever, but then you converge. And so it introduced me to that pattern, and that it's like things in my brain were waking up as I was exposed to these new ideas. And then I went to work for John Deere, and then it was the situation Lance described. All of a sudden I found myself as a product manager, all these engineers looking at me. What are the next, what do we need this tire or this tire? 5 options or 3 options, do we need the fancy decal or the cheap decal? And I'm like, so it was sort of all of a sudden I had this, massive task before me to try to wow, how do people do this? Surely my opinion is not what should be guiding all of these things. And that really led me to investigation, and ultimately, but somebody has also solved this problem. There's no reason why I should have to figure this out. And a friend of mine, a good friend, was an MBA student at Duke, and he said, "Man, I think you should read this book." And it was What Customers Want by Tony Olwick. And which laid out Tony's very actionable process called outcome-driven innovation for how you begin with a job, how you list out the needs, something called outcome statements. And it was an end-to-end process. And I was fascinated by this book. But some of my prior experiences of just understanding some basics of creative problem solving and lean manufacturing, it just connected a lot of those, a lot of that wiring. And then one great benefit, by the way, of being somewhere like John Deere is they have big, nice budgets for doing research. But we did a project here, a project there. You did all these different projects. One project would combine, you're sort of looking at attributes, and one project you're looking at sort of qualities of the market, and it's just all these sort of disparate things. And none of them are helping me to know, do I need 3 tires or 4 tires? None of them are helping me to know what, it's not helping me to make these decisions. It's something I've said many times since is, all market research is interesting. Hire market research, you do it yourself. I promise you, talk to customers, talk to 3, talk to 5, talk to 20. It'll be very interesting. But interesting is a very low bar for what that should be. And I can tell you in the years since, I've gotten this sort of unusual consulting assignment that comes up where companies want me to look at their past research, and I see it over and over again. And they want me to make sense of their past research. And you've got this mixture of attributes and needs and wants and all these different things. And it's, again, super interesting. I like to say when you're at the bar later and drinking a chocolate milk or whatever, you can talk about it, but it's not actual. But that's really what outcome-driven innovation was for me. It helped to make this concept of jobs to be done. Look, begin at the top. A customer hires a product or service to help them accomplish a job being a goal, objective, or a problem to be solved. We start there, and immediately we sort of drop the scales fall off our eyes of our own, whatever this thing is we're selling. And there's a phrase of Lance's that I've repeated many times. I don't know where you got it from, Lance, but we co-presented one time, and Lance, the big theme was moving from what people are buying to why they are buying it. And that's the quotable Lance Bencourt right there. But to me, that's a really good way of thinking about it. Moving beyond this, because we come up with all these sort of artificial distinctions. Is it a product? Is it a service? By the way, spoiler alert, most things are some combination of the two. You buy a car, there's a warranty, or there's usually, there's very few, the point is, it doesn't matter, because the customer ultimately cares about this thing they want to accomplish. And this is a hard lesson for people. They don't care about your brand. They don't care about how cool you think your technology is. At least it's not as much as you think they do. And for now, my company now, we specialize in B2B. Here's a real hard one. And if you're in B2B, you're not going to like this. But customers don't care about their relationship with you. You think they do, but all of those are, even the relationship is an attribute of a solution. And with the jobs to be done lens, then that becomes more clear. But anyway, to sort of bring it together, there was an old razor commercial that the guy says, I was so enthusiastic about the razor, I joined the company. So it was sort of similar. and I ended up joining Strategian, and Lance and I became colleagues. And there was a movie, I forget what it was, but it was like, I forget the name of it, but there was a guy who was a big fan, like the biggest fan of the world in this rock band. And like their lead singer quit and he got to join the band. That's what I felt like when I was Strategian, as there's just brilliant people there. And that's where honestly, I got my real education, working side by side with people. Exactly. Like Lance and I traveled together, and that was my university in the sky. When we flew together, I asked him a lot of questions, and Lance is very, very thoughtful, and he thinks about these things very deeply. And I was just sort of hanging on for dear life, trying to understand. But one last thing I'll sort of conclude with, Lance mentioned having applied it in lots of contexts. That's where you really understand how powerful it is. If you're in one business, you sort of have a lot of shortcuts about what the market is and this and that. And what you start to miss are the just general principles of, you can sort of get by with these heuristics, these shortcuts. But if you do a project in insurance and with mining truck tires and forestry equipment and whatever else, medical technology things, the jobs to be done for anybody. These are great ways of getting into and understanding any market. You sort of have a template by which to understand the world. And once you go deeper, there's, well, I won't, anyway, I'll sort of stop right there.
Well, and Mark, let me just comment on one simple thing. Well, not simple. I want to comment on it because it's so impactful, but Scott's talking about, and you had led in with this as well, the job is solution independent. And so someone is trying to accomplish something. And as Scott was saying, once you go to that level, it automatically helps you with understanding customer needs in this deeper and broader way that can lead you. One, it forces you to think about needs beyond that thing you currently have, whether it's a tangible good or a service or a software or some combination of these. It forces you to understand needs in a way that gets beyond that. And that is so subtle, but so revolutionary, because it's what allows you to really ultimately, again, understand customer needs in a way that allows you to think creatively. And really, it's not even just for innovation, right? Our anchor here is innovation. That's where Scott and I have done the most application. But I truly believe that there's nothing more fundamental to running a business well than understanding customer needs. And so if you can understand this well, you can also think about strategy. You can think about technology pipelines. You can think about acquisitions and developments and things like that as well. But it all anchors around that point of saying we need a focus that's beyond what we offer today.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate the insights. And Scott, Mark Wahlberg played the character in the movie you were talking about, but I can't quite think of the name of the movie. It was like Rockstar or something like that.
That's the movie.
So,
that's right.
Scott Burleson, Mark Wahlberg, associate those.
Oh yeah, well, people make that mistake all the time.
I'm sure that happens a lot.
Yeah.
All right, so let's kind of cut to the chase. All right, we're talking about all this soft customer needs stuff and customer job stuff. Doesn't innovation really just start with technology?
I'll take first stab at that. So,
oh, by the way, before you start, audience members, as I said at first, please feel free to put questions in the chat. I've got the chat box open so I can see those as they pop up. All right, go ahead, Lance.
Well, so, I mean, I guess, again, this kind of goes back to what we were just saying as a nice lead in is, look, if you really want to innovate something well in terms of anchored around customer needs, then the best starting point for you is something that isn't anchored around what you do and what you offer today. And so Scott was saying, oh, I hope I might make some of the B2B people upset by saying that, the customer doesn't really care about your relationship. Because they do value the relationship, but they value the relationship as a means to an end. It helps them in certain things that they're trying to accomplish in managing their overall vendor network and other things like that. And so I would say the same thing in the technology realm. Here's some upsetting words, right? Is the customer doesn't really care about your technology. It's the same sort of idea. What they do care about, and it goes back to what you were saying right up front, Mark, right, is they ultimately have something they're trying to accomplish. And technology, when we see technology applied in everything, right? I mean, to Scott's point, right, our tractors have technology, but our tractors don't just have mechanical technology now. They connect to the cloud, and there's AI, advanced analytics and things like that going on. There's predictive analytics, and there's There's digitalization, taking the data in and doing what you will with it. It's big data now. And that's in our tractor, and that's in our medical space, and that's in our education space, and that's in our banking space. That's in our everything space. And so technology is everywhere. Why is technology everywhere? Technology is everywhere because it offers this really great potential solution base to help customers, whoever they might be in all these different domains, to more successfully accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. And the only way to know if a particular technology, let's take AI for the moment, predictive analytics. The only way we can really know if predictive analytics would be valuable in a given situation is to say, well, what's the customer trying to accomplish in that situation? What are the struggles that they have in getting that done today? Maybe there's something that takes them longer than they would like it to take. Maybe there's something that's like these certain mistakes happen today based on the current solutions I have. And there's just, it's less than optimal in some way in terms of results. It's just not quite what I want it to be. If we can go talk to customers today to figure that out, then we get to go back to the technology inside and be the experts on the technology to say, well, gee, there is this thing out there called predictive analytics and AI and personalization and digitalization and big data, and we've got all this stuff out there. Might we take some of that and apply it to better satisfying this challenge that then lets this customer to better accomplish this ultimate goal that they have? If we can know that, then we can know where predictive analytics will truly be valuable, or digitalization or personalization or anything else, right? I mean, technology is, when I deal with wound care, technology is surgical glues and lasers, and right, it doesn't have to be just big data things. But no matter what the context, the value of that technology depends on the problems and challenges customers are having and what they're trying to accomplish. And so that becomes a useful anchor point. Now, that said, I do believe that there's a place for basic research to be advancing what's going on in AI and what's going on in predictive analytics and what's going on with data management. There's absolutely a place for that, but I still wouldn't know where to apply it and where to apply it best unless I have that anchor point around what customers' needs are in getting their jobs done.
Yeah, and Scott, while you're collecting your thoughts, I might note, Lance, that what you just shared relates to a comment that Chris just put on the chat, that it's not always heat-seeking, cutting-edge technology that actually helps customers. Sometimes you need to simplify things or reduce the complexity. And I think sometimes if technology is forced onto a situation, it may be difficult for customers to use. It may actually hinder the customer. So anyway, Chris, thanks for the comment there.
Well, it's funny you say that, Mark. While I was in the education system with my kids who have been elementary and high school, et cetera, technology there is so much applied as, let's just give everyone a tablet. And they'll, for the classroom. And it's like, to what end? To what end? And, you know, is it just for technology's sake? And so often that's what it is. And it's like, well, that's just a really big waste of money then, as opposed to saying, no, it's these educational outcomes, these educational needs, and we're going to use technology and train our faculty and staff so that they can incorporate it in a way that advances learning and knowledge and skills. Great. But that's not how it's done. We think we need technology because technology is cool, so let's spend money on it. And that can happen in companies as well.
Yeah. Scott, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, if technology can be a starting point, but at least in my frame, the initial question is, well, what does that help somebody to do better? You know, what are they trying to accomplish? What does it help them do better? But the much more common problem is that within companies, they literally, like, let me put it this way. If you have an engineer and they are working on, I'll give you a real example. In John Deere, this is years ago, you know, you had engineers that their job was to make a cab tractor quieter. Every day they get up and that's what they're doing, trying to make it quieter and quieter and quieter. And without any idea of customer needs, at some point, they're going to go beyond what people even care about. And so the problem is, so it's not that technology couldn't be a valid starting point, then work back here into jobs. The much more common problem is you have lots of folks working on technologies and they will convince themselves that customers value the technology for its sake. And that's the sort of, that's where the error in thinking, and isn't this cool? Isn't this cool? And there's this, I don't know, there's some group dynamics, you know, I'm not a psychologist, but when people start to, they start to sort of repeat the same ideas to each other, it sort of takes on this truth. It starts to feel like what was just some idea. Hey, I think it'd be cool if we did this. And then at the lunch table, we're talking about it every day. Fast forward, then the executives, they start talking about their lunch tables and all of a sudden this thing becomes a fact that people will absolutely, they want this AI, they want this robotics, they want this GPS, whatever. And it's just, so that's the reason I think Jobs Be Done folks, you know, we're very acutely aware of this much more common error of getting too enthusiastic about the technology. I mean, you know, there's certainly a technology, what does it do? It improves performance in some way. If you can connect that to improving something a customer cares about, it's fantastic that you start with the technology. But it's just much more common situation is we literally convince ourselves it is about the technology. And when you have technologists working on it, they are very interested in it. They do think it's very cool. And so confirmation bias comes in and just sort of become clouded. Now, in my experience, with just a little bit of self-awareness, you know, folks that are deep technologists, they can see this other perspective. They can start to see customer needs and they can understand it very well. But it takes a little bit of effort. Like it's anything just think about anything you're interested in, any hobby you have. Like you sort of like, why doesn't everybody watch football on Saturday? Why doesn't everybody, like, you start to assume everybody's sort of like me. And so a real dedicated technologist, either they're people, strangely enough, and so they make this very common. I guess it's a logical fallacy, maybe, but just to tie this back together, one of the coolest things when I first joined Strategy, and so I went to NC State, and we happened to be Strategy was having a meeting in Raleigh. And so some of the folks at Strategy had arranged a meeting with like all the top dignitaries at NC State, the chancellor and all these deans, and there's little me in the meeting with them. Well, what's the topic? You might have been there, Lance. I also can't remember. But the topic of the meeting was, hey, we've got like all this technology, all of these patents. We've got thousands of patents, and we don't know what to do with them. You guys are these innovation experts. Can you tell us? It was literally like my second day on the job. And so I'm not saying anything, but I'm thinking, no, no, I'm thinking, no, we cannot. We don't have any magic insight, you know, to connect all these, you know, all these biological and electrical, all these technologies. So it's just a much tougher, you know, if you got a bunch of technology, it's very difficult to connect that. You know, you've always got stories like, you know, whatever, the invention of, you know, somebody's growing mold in a cup and they notice it kills bacteria. Well, somebody has to make that leap in this sort of discovery to some useful purpose.
Scott, that's a great lead in actually to a comment that my friend Kyle Flotman just posted on the chat. It seems that firms, though, as you're discovering customer problems, you do have to have an inventory of potential ways to solve those problems. And so it's not that this research can be totally reactive, because that kind of leads to another question I wanted to ask, which is that critics of kind of customer focused innovation argue, okay, all customers can ever do is tell you little tweaks to your current product. If you're led by customers, all you're going to do is incrementally innovate.
Right.
Let's start with you, Scott. Can you speak to that? I mean, how does the Jobs to Be Done perspective address
It's
that?
one of the most common questions that I think we get. And so we have to, it's back to Henry Ford. If I'd asked my customers what they wanted, you know, they'd have said a faster horse. And we have to be in what actually, so it feels like, oh, is Jobs Be Done breaking? No, it is very useful in helping us to understand what information we can get from a customer. There's just some information that they are the world experts in, and there's some information, they're very reliable. And there's other types of information they're not as reliable. I stopped short of saying they can't say it, but I say they're not as reliable. What are they a reliable data source of? They are a reliable source of what they're trying to accomplish. They know what they're trying to accomplish. If you walk into a doctor's office and they say, "What are you here for?" You're not going to say, "I don't know. I'm just here." No, there's some reason. Like you take your car somewhere to get work done. What's your car here? I don't know. No, that you don't say that. So customer, they know absolutely. I'll try not to mix my metaphors too much here. They absolutely know what they're trying to accomplish. We'll stick with the car one for a second. You know, it makes a sound. It does this. It does that. Now, does that customer, do they know how to fix it? Do they know what's wrong with it? Do they know that something needs to be changed? No, they're not experts in their product or technology. They know what they want to accomplish, and they can also tell you their experiences that they've had when working with their car or whatever, and they can tell you where it's fallen short. So they can tell you what they're trying to accomplish. They can tell you their experiences and where it's falling short. Now, as far as on the solution side, they are unreliable. They're unreliable. So they're unreliable about if they say I want a certain feature that does something, they're unreliable about if it even should be that feature. But so what do? We get them back to where they're reliable. You want this Bluetooth thing. You want this AI. How will that help you? What will that help you to accomplish? And that's not unique to jobs to be done. I mean, that's qualitative interviewers have been using that for years, but a jobs to be done person thinks they sort of immediately frame that. That's a solution. The customer told me they want this solution. Okay, so so I just ask them, for what reason? You work from this thing they're unreliable back to something where they're reliable.
Lance, your thoughts?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I had seen that comment come through, sort of popped up on my screen too, and I haven't looked at it because I didn't want to distract myself here. But it was about, this seems very reactive instead of proactive, and as I think what the comment was. And so I definitely want to address that. Actually, it's interesting because when that comment came up, we were talking about shouldn't it be technology led or isn't it technology led? And I don't know if the person's comment tied to that. But the interesting thing is that the more you lead with technology or current solution, the more reactive it is. And so if someone's saying, hey, we've got this technology, what should we do with it, NC State or other, right? That's incredibly reactive and incredibly constraining on whatever that thing is and whatever that thing could do. That points us to a potential problem. We want to go explore that problem or its potential value. And so that's very reactive. Jobs to be done actually can be very proactive. And so it certainly, to Scott's point earlier, right? From the customer's perspective, they want to accomplish something. The best way to accomplish that might be via tangible good, integrated with software, tangible good integrated with software and service, tangible good with an experience, with a relationship with a company. All of that coming together might ultimately be where the solution is. And so if we can focus on what the customer is trying to accomplish, it takes us beyond how we have things today. It takes us beyond how we envisioned it. It allows us to sort of remove the blinders of what's possible and all that. And we don't think just about tangible goods innovation. We don't just think about service innovation. We don't just think about experiential innovation or brand innovation. We think about all of these and what's best to come together. And our ideation is very open to say, how do we best solve this problem? Now, how do you do that then? How do you be proactive? We actually could start with hey, this is what your current solution is today. And then to Scott's point, we would start there, but then say, why is that hired? Why is that hired? And maybe it's multiple jobs up here, but why is it hired? And once we get to that job level, then that's where I'm going to go talk to customers to figure out what their needs are. And their needs are things like, what takes a long time in doing that job today? Not the solution, not how long it is to take to set it up. We're not focused on that at all. We're like, how long does it take to do this activity related to managing my money or investing or something like that, or completing a surgery? I'm going to mix my metaphors too. We're focused on that. We're focused on the mistakes that happen along the way, the suboptimal results that happen along the way. And once we do that, and then we prioritize those, that allows us to step back and be hugely proactive to say, now we know what the problems are with the thing the person's trying to accomplish that is not time dependent. If someone's trying to invest to grow wealth, that is relevant today, is relevant 20 years from now. It was relevant 20 years ago. As long as we've had something to invest in, it's relevant. And the needs and the challenges, the problems and the delays that we can uncover today are going to be relevant 5 years from now, 10, 20, 30 as well. Now, priorities will change as innovations come along. And that's our goal, is to say, what's a struggle or a delay today? And then how do we go about better addressing that and satisfying it? And that allows us to be proactive, going beyond what we have today, to think about very innovative ways to do it. And honestly, sometimes innovation is technology. And sometimes it's like, geez, if we would just bring these two things together and these two parts of our organization together that don't talk today, that would be revolutionary. And so that's why we don't want to get wrapped around the technology, because maybe, maybe not. So I'll just give one little example there, a very simple example that we're familiar with. I did a study in sort of making purchases a few years ago, and the reason why credit cards are hired, right? Credit cards themselves are hired to help us to make purchases, day-to-day buys, et cetera. And there was a need that came about from that, which was, and it's one that I care about passionately, and I care passionately about it because it still hasn't been solved. It's to minimize the likelihood. So in making purchases, my job up here, I want to minimize the likelihood of not qualifying for a discount or not receiving a discount for which I'm qualified based on the various memberships that I have. I am a member of the United States Bowling Congress, among other things, because that's my particular passion. Scott, I just wanted to work in bowling somewhere. So this is my bowling moment. I'm also a member of various other organizations, and we all are. And they send us these things saying, hey, discounts on this and discounts on this and discounts on this. And I don't get any of them. I've never used United States Bowling Congress for anything because I don't remember what it is. I don't have it at the moment of purchase. And I've got 50 of these memberships, and I don't know what they're all good for and when I could use them. But that's an unmet need that someone online, a Capital One or otherwise, could innovate so that when I'm on Amazon, I've pre-programmed in there all my different memberships, and they are out there categorizing what these different memberships qualify for, so that moment that I'm online, I don't have to remember, I don't have to think about it. And it simply tells me, you know, that United States Bowling Congress, USBC, could give you a 10% discount on this rental car, 15% discount with this brand, if you will and it's already automated. We've already done it for you. It's already programmed, and boop, there you go. They're doing that stuff with coupon codes and things like that right now. This is just one step beyond that. That's technology being applied to a very specific problem that I can tell you today exists, even though there's not an innovation. And if I can tell you a need today that's important and unmet, and it doesn't have a solution today, then I can tell you I can be proactive. I can get ahead of these things. And that's just one example. I could share others, but it's absolutely possible if you've got the right focus.
Sounds good. Well, so guys, let's assume that a lot of people in the audience are kind of convinced that this stuff we've been talking about makes a lot of sense. It's a great way to do it. Can you each give us just a little bit of practical advice about how do you get down to the job and the outcome level of specificity that you've been talking about? I mean, Scott, you mentioned that, you know, customers are reliable sources of some kind of information and less reliable for others. But would you each just give us a few practical tips of how do you get this data?
So my first thing is when you're getting started and scoping the project or framing the project, slow down, take plenty of time, don't rush it. All too often, it's like, I would start interviewing customers, set up appointments. No, let's slow down. Let's pretend like we make sutures, right? Medical technology, we make sutures. Okay, all right, let's go start interviewing people using sutures. So slow down. Okay. So what's the purpose of our sutures? Oh, it helps surgeons to close, or it helps somebody to close a wound. All right. Next question. Who? Veterinarians close wounds. Surgeons close wounds. You know, I don't know, maybe trainers, athletic trainers close wounds. There's closing wound. And then what are the different contexts? Closing wounds in a hospital, closing wounds in a first aid situation, closing wounds in a military, in the field, closing wounds again on athletic field. And so you begin with it's often a common starting point because usually you make something. With him from what's the job? Okay, we'll say closing wounds, and now we have to pick the job executor, the who. Let's say veterinarians, but the truth is internally a lot of times there's everybody we often have different ideas about who we should talk to, and normally we move too quickly, and then you're sort of setting yourself up for failure. So my first bit of advice would be slow down in the beginning. determine what the job is, what the job executor is, what the context meaning like in a hospital, in the military field, first aid, what's in scope and what's out of scope. And then once you have that, what do you have? You have, I know I'm going to talk to veterinarians who are closing wounds. Now you might have to, now that I've gone down that road, maybe you have to even select the animal, closing wounds, surgical wounds on dogs within their clinic. I mean, you can make that as broad or as narrow as you want. There's sort of trade-offs. If the narrower it is, the deeper you can go. Like if it's veterinarians with the dogs, whatever, you'll get into the whatever the different things about dogs are. I don't know. I'm talking myself in a corner. But if it's just broadly pets, I mean, then that's going to be you're not going to go as deep because you're going to have to go a bit wider. And so you have to have this conversation about depth versus breadth. And the other thing I'll add to that is, what's the business intention? What is your business's job to be done? Is it to launch a product next year? Is it just to improve your marketing messages? Is it you've got these great R&D people and you want to set them you want to give them something to, like a big thing to work on for 10 years now. So that's the other thing I would say is, take the time to walk through that sort of job ecosystem and real carefully talk to your leadership. Make sure everybody's clear on what the business's job be done, if you will, the business intention. Get all those in sync, and then you've got a plan of who to go to interview. And from there, honestly, the interviewing techniques, I mean, there's some specific things we could talk about, but it's a lot of common qualitative methods from that point.
Well, actually, let me build exactly where Scott left off then, because I tell people when I train them on this, 3 things. One is, if you know what a need looks like and what you're going after. And so if you've got that job focus that Scott was talking about, needs come in not only 3 domains, but primarily 3 domains, and their outcomes, measures of success in getting the job done. And they are things related to time and effort. So what takes a lot of time? Ask that question. Mistakes and variability. What is inconsistent or variable, and what mistakes can happen while doing this job at this particular point in the process? And then a suboptimal or optimal results. What does optimal results look like from this at this point in time, and what would be suboptimal? And so if I know what I'm looking for, Mark, and then I ask the right questions that ask specifically about those things I just mentioned, that takes you 2/3 of the way. The final third is the biggest challenge, though, which is then I need to be real-time listening and being willing to recognize when I've gone far enough, when I haven't gone far enough, and to say, can you tell me more about that? Can you tell me what the specific challenge is? But I often tell people in training, it's like, look, it's often time or a problem. And if you can anchor just around those 2 things, focused on the job to be done, that alone is as practical as it can possibly be. And then record it and listen to it later and draw out more insights. It's amazing what you can do.
Building on that once more, and once you have that job, it says close a wound. What's everything that goes wrong when closing a wound? What are all the problems? What are all the imperfections? What are all the errors? I find I don't need 50 questions. Often I can have a great interview on the whatever 3 or 4 I just threw out there. Yep. Because once they say, oh, sometimes there's challenges with it, doesn't heal quickly enough. Or really, tell me more about that. And now I'm searching for, what are the root causes of it not healing? Oh, with bigger dogs, littler dogs, whatever. Oh, because certain surgeries. Sorry, So once I'm looking for the problem. So what challenge? The wound doesn't close fast enough, or it gets infected, and then I'm going deeper. Meaning, just like a fishbone diagram. What are all the causes of those infections? And I want to get every single one of those. And I'm going to keep, so this causes infection, really, and I'm going to understand that. What else? So then I'm going to stick with that infection. What else causes infection? And we're just going to beat that infection to death until we've got all of them. And now we've got infection. Okay. What other challenges? What else goes wrong when closing wounds? Oh, and then you get whatever, they'll give you another one, and then you just want to keep exploring. And for an interviewer, you want to be very patient with your customer. You want to give them time to think. You want to give yourself time to think, and you want to just really listen and just think about what are the problems and what are the root causes. And that's all, but you're not going to get everything, but also give yourself a little bit of a break. You're not going to get everything from any one person. That's why you interview a sample. So it's anyway.
So
yeah, and I love that Scott made the point, just to reiterate it, that it's jobs are done because it has a focus going in and we know what we're going after. That allows you, one, to know what you're listening for, but two, to ask a handful of questions. You don't have to have 50 different questions. That's a big deal.
Yeah. Yep.
So I want to ask one quick follow-up. Before I do that, I want to just ask the audience to be thinking about, if you have other questions you want to address, we can open it up for some more kind of general Q&A at this point. So be thinking of those questions. But Lance and Scott, so you're interviewing these customers, you're really trying to push down, you're trying to understand their needs, their pain points, to use a term that Suzanne put in the chat box there. What do you do though when the customer says, well, you need to bevel your blade, you need to add this feature, you need to?
Sure. And that's a very common, in fact, it's not a horrible question to ask about how they do things today and what they'd like to see improved, as long as you know what you're going after, which then allows me to elevate the conversation. And it's a very simple one in that case, right? What would the benefit of that double blade size be to you? What would the benefit be? And if they go, well, the struggle, and sometimes you go I'm like, does it save you time in some way? Does it allow you to avoid some variability or mistake in some way? Does it allow you to achieve more optimal results in some way? I'm actually going back to my mind thinking about, these are the types of measures of success. And it could be both of those. It could be, well, it both saves time and it avoids certain problems. Great. Where is time saved? What specific problem? Anything else? Anything else? To Scott's point, right, is there's always the what else question. And so it's okay that they talk in features because that's what they understand. My role as the expert is to make sure we don't stay there.
Okay, sounds good. Well, this has been a really wide-ranging discussion, and I think it's been super helpful and super interesting. Audience, are there questions that you have? I mean, Peggy and Megan, can we open it up for people to ask questions live, or do you want them to put them in the chat box?
We can open it up live if you would like.
Okay, yeah, let's open it for just a minute, and if anybody has a question, I won't tarry too long on this. If there aren't questions, anything at all that anyone wants to ask live.
While others are throwing it out there, Mark, I'm just glancing, and Suzanne had asked about the best practices. That was 10 minutes ago, so hopefully I've answered that.
Yes.
If not, Suzanne can follow up, but it really, to me, is knowing what I'm going for and asking the very specific questions. And honestly, one of the things that Scott and I didn't talk about is, look, people hire solutions to get jobs done. And so they are actually good at talking about solutions and anchoring their conversation about solutions. I'm not going to anchor my whole conversation there as an interviewer, but that doesn't mean that I won't ask them one of my favorite questions, which is, if you get this job done sometimes with solution A and sometimes with solution B, in what ways, in getting the job done, in what ways is solution A better than B? And in what ways is B better than A? How does it save you time? How does it avoid certain problems, and so on? I need to know that I'm not anchoring around solution. I'm anchoring around the measures of success on the job. But that doesn't mean it's not a good question to ask, because customers are good talking about that. As long as I use that to get to the job, it's a very productive way of getting to their insight. So hopefully that helps Suzanne as well.
Yeah, and I had seen her question, and that's why I kind of went towards the practical way there.
Yeah, good.
Okay, well, I'll keep an eye on chat then. So audience, if you've got something, Kyle, I see you've got your hand up there.
You should be able to unmute yourself, Kyle.
Oh, okay. We'll just take that as a wave then. All right.
Hi, Kyle.
Yeah. Well, everybody way back at Kyle. Okay, so I'll keep
he's not able to unmute himself. I'm sorry.
Megan, can you unmute Kyle?
Yeah, I will try.
Let's give that a quick try. And while we're trying to do that, Lance and Scott, the question I'm going to pose to you to kind of wrap things up here in just a moment is just if you have a quick favorite success story of jobs to be done, work that you've done.
Kyle, comment now, Mark, or wait a moment?
Well, let's wait and see if we can get Kyle unmuted. Oh, Kyle, you're unmuted.
Yes, I'm free. I'm free now. I will say, raising my hand virtually brought me back a couple of years. So I have a question for each of you. So when you're working with customers, trying to get them to open up and really understand what their needs truly are and the job that they're trying to solve. What are your go-to kind of openers to help open up that conversation and help them be a little more thoughtful and more honest?
I'll jump in there. So the first couple questions that I'll ask they're more to set the customer at ease than anything. I'm not going to jump straight into the heart of it. Now, if it's veterinarians and they're closing wounds, they're going to be highly interested in that. But I might start like, well, tell me about the history of your practice. How long have you been here? It's a bit of a bridge between small talk and the topic at hand. Back when doing I did just John Deere. We were talking when I was there, we did a lot of projects with tractors and on people's properties. And I settled on the same opening question. It was, well, tell me a little bit about your property. And they had these acres and that acres, and we bought that from mama, and we did this, and we got this, and they were immediately the purpose is to get them a little chatty and talkative. And it's a bit of a judgment call as to when you move from this phase to getting the heart of things. But it takes a little bit of time to think of those opening questions. Honestly, I want it to be relevant, but very easy to answer, like just super easy to answer. Tell me a little about your property, but I don't know. I'm curious to hear what it says.
Well, and I would simply say that, as when you structure surveys, when you structure interviews here, right, to Scott's point is I do exactly what Scott talks about. So let's talk about the next step. Then we start talking about questions to understand needs. I am certainly trying to anticipate questions that also will be easy for them to answer. And so I'm not going to jump into a specific challenging point in the process with a very specific question about a time challenge that might be like, oh, I haven't thought that deeply about this. I'm going to start with, just talk to me overall. What are the big delays that you see in this process, or what are the big challenges? Or I might talk about, something about solution A versus B, because again, that's something that people are very comfortable talking about. And so I'm certainly going to think about the easiest questions, and I'm going to narrow down over time to something that might be a little more challenging, because as Scott was saying, right, you want to build a rapport for the same reason, as I want to make sure that they are comfortable sharing and that they don't feel like this is going to be a test. On the other hand, at some point, I do need to get more narrow, and sometimes those questions fall flat. That's why we do multiple interviews too. I've had great interviews. I've had horrible interviews, even with the same process. It does depend on the person, and you just kind of got to get over it. And so thank goodness I've got some more interviews coming. And as you begin doing some of this, if you're going to do it, just know that that's the case too, and know that any conversation with a customer with a proper focus is better than no conversation. And I encourage you to get out there and do.
And take the pressure off yourself to that note. I mean, sometimes it's them. I mean, you do the best. Maybe it's you. It doesn't matter. Some you learn. There'll be one person, man, you'll learn a ton from. I had one just a couple of weeks ago. I won't share the context. Let's pretend it's veterinarians. It wasn't. Let's just pretend. And what challenges do you have with your closing wounds? Oh, nothing. It's super easy. I'm like, oh, great. This person's gonna make me work hard. That's the hard. If they say everything's great, then they're just not engaged. That I learned a few things. It wasn't the best. Wasn't that great. Yeah. And so I mentioned this as an interviewer. Just take the pressure off yourself. You do the best you can. If you're genuinely curious about what their jobs are, you will learn lots of things. Maybe when you get more experience, you'll learn more. But hey, you have to sort of get there. You can't start out experienced.
So let me cut in here. We want to be respectful of people's time, and I want to give Peggy a moment or two to kind of wrap things up. There was one final question that Matt posted, just asking if the discussions differ when you're dealing with an external customer versus an internal customer. Could one of you give just a 15-second response to external versus internal customer?
I'll do that. So if you're talking about an internal stakeholder that's guiding the project with external customers, then I think the conversation is different, because we just need to understand the job they're trying to get done from the standpoint of their business objectives. But if we're talking about an internal stakeholder, as in an internal customer who themselves has a job to be done, for which my IT support group is going to help them to do that, then I'd say it's the same conversation, still anchored around the job that they're trying to get done, just like you would do with an external customer.
Great, thanks. Thanks, everybody. This has been really great. Peggy, let me hand it back to you, and we can thank our panelists.
Yes, and absolutely. Thank you so much, both Scott and Lance. We really appreciate you guys sharing your expertise with us. I want to give a quick shout out to Northern Trust, who's the sponsor for this series. We really appreciate their support and allowing us to continue to be lifelong partners with our alumni and bring them cutting edge information from experts like you too. So thank you. For those of you interested in additional conversations, our next Alumni Advantage will be in the first half of February. And the topic is being employers for employees of the future. I'll have more description of that and more information about our panelists. And for those of you who are in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, plan to join us for the next Tandy Executive Speaker Series, where Sint Marshall, who is the CEO of the Dallas Mavericks, will be speaking to us over breakfast. So watch for emails from me on both of those things. All right, so thanks again, panelists. We really appreciate you sharing your time and energy with us. And thank you, alumni, for joining us today.
I've been practicing my little horn frog thing.
Oh, and definitely go
I had that at the ready. That was my preparation.
Go frogs.
That's it. Go frogs. Thank you guys so
Go
much.
frogs. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.